Welcome back to our next project section, which is the very exciting testimonial section. And here, remember, we had already decided in the very beginning of the project that we were going to put the customers and the photo gallery side by side. So what we're going to do here is a very different section this time, which is going to go all the way from the left side to the right side of the browser. So not having a centered container, but instead filling up basically the entire available width. And so that is what we call a full bleed section. So again, we will have the gallery on the right side, and on the left side, we will have this 2x2 grid of customer testimonials, just like in this first design example that we have here on the right side. Okay? So this is going to be really exciting because it's going to be quite different from the other sections. And so let's get to work. All right. And as always, let's add a new section right after the previous one. And I'm calling this one, as you can guess, the section Testimonials. All right. And now, as I just said before, here we are not going to use a container. So that container element that we created before to center the context in the page. So instead, we will basically have two boxes, one for the testimonials and one for the gallery. So let's do that here. So let's write that just here. And then another one for the gallery. All right. And so these two, we want them to be side by side, right? And so what we can do here is to use our grid class right here on this section, right? So grid and grid, two columns. So let's just quickly check that out. And I need to reload the browser here manually. So sometimes that is necessary. And indeed, now here we have the testimonials all the way to the left side and the gallery all the way to the right side. Great. So let's add some padding here to this section for now to give ourselves some more space. And then we will simply start by filling up the content for the testimonials. So I will again copy this. And then section like this. Okay. So let's actually reach into our content file and get the testimonials from there. So yeah, right here. So this is the first one here from Dave Bryson. So let's paste that here. And now we need to mark this up. So we want a customer photo. We then want this text here in another element. And then below that is the name. So Dave Bryson here. And so we need some kind of container element for all of this, right? Now we could, of course, use a simple div element, but here actually there is another element which makes a bit more sense, which is the figure element. And I'm not sure if we have used the figure element before, but in any way, we can use it to represent some self-contained content, and which sometimes has a caption. So this is perfect for things like diagrams or photos or code listings, or really anything that can have a caption and that is self-contained. And a testimonial like the one we are about to write here, I think qualifies quite nicely for that. So you will see the figure element being used for this kind of thing all the time. Okay. So let's call this one the testimonial. And then, well, first let's start with the image, actually. So image, then it's probably in the customers folder. And there we have actually a named photo for each of them. So this is Dave, and so the photo is probably dave.jpg, right? And now for the actual testimonial content, we can use the block quote element. So block quote, as the name says, is basically for representing quotes. So things that someone else said. And so a testimonial is exactly that. And the same is true for something like a product review, or even to quote someone in the context of an article or a blog post, for example. So block quote is perfect in this case. Let's call it the testimonial text, and then put that right there. Here we forgot the class right here. So testimonial image and also the alt text. Let's say photo of customer Dave Bryson. Okay, and now we just need to mark up the name here, and for that we can use a simple paragraph or a span element. So that doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use a paragraph here. So testimonial name, let's say, and then let's add his name right there. And then it's also common to like add a dash in front of the name. So for that, we can use just another HTML entity. And this one is called m dash. So if we hover over that, you see there it is. So instead of just using this, which wouldn't look so great, the m dash is exactly what we're looking for. So checking that out, here we go. So the image is always a bit too big, but this time it's not so bad. So we can actually, I think, start adding the rest of the content here before having to adjust the CSS first. So let's copy all of this and put them all one after another. So we have 4 testimonials, so 4 code blocks here. And the next one is, need to go back. Let's copy all this, and I will immediately paste it actually into this block quote element. And then we just remove the name here. Also here, and then here we go. So let's see. Indeed, now the second one is great. And now let's just replace the third and the fourth one. And so this part of filling up the content is always a bit boring. But well, the content is the most important thing, so we have to do it, of course. So here and here. And just one last time. And just replacing the name here one last time. Okay, great. So let's check that out. And there we go. So now what we want to do next is to put these 4 here into a 2x2 grid, right? So that's easy. So let's do that. And For that, we need to select this testimonials, which is basically the parent of these four. And so we will make this one here our grid container. Now, you might think that we could use, of course, the reusable grid that we created before. And indeed, we could, but probably the spacing on that one is not ideal. So the gap that we used there, which makes sense for bigger layouts, is probably too big for a smaller component like this one. And so here we simply create our own new grid. So basically that reusable grid that we created is more for the overall page layout. All right. So grid, template columns, 1FR and 1FR. And then let's create some smaller gap. So maybe 4.8 rem. That's always a good value to start with. And let's also make the image immediately a bit smaller. So testimonial image. And now this image, we actually don't want it to be flexible. So let me show you what would happen if we did. So setting a width of 100% would make it probably way too big. Right? So that's not what we're looking for. Indeed, it is nicely fluid like this. But again, yeah, these images here, we want them to be a fixed width. So let's say instead 64 pixels. And since these images are squared, the height will then automatically be figured out by the browser. We also want to make them round. And again, since they are squared already, we can just use border radius 50%. Okay, nice. That's starting to look a lot better. Now, there is no spacing here yet on the side here, but we will fix that a little bit later. So for now, let's just take care here of the visual styling just of this text here. So very quickly, we want the testimonial text and the testimonial name. So here we're going to use our common 1.8 rem again. So this is the one that we have been using all the time for all kinds of contents. And so it's nice to keep it consistent. And the same for the line height as well. So again, using 1.8 rem here. Or actually, of course, not rem, just 1.8. Because this is basically a multiplier. So this will multiply the font size here by 1.8. And that will then be the line height. Remember that? And then let's also add some margin here to the bottom. And here we will not have a lot of space. So let's keep it small at 16 pixels. And of course, we also need some space below the image. So margin bottom 1.2. So that's the previous step in our spacing system. And then here, the name. And here, as for visual hierarchy, this one is a lot less important. So let's make it smaller. Let's say 1.6 rem. And let's also make it even lighter. Now the main text is 555 and the darker text is 333, right? And so let's try for this one here, 777. And we will actually change this here in a minute because of the color contrast ratio. But for now, let's go with this. So let's check it out. And beautiful. That looks really cool. Now let's actually just add the section heading here. And that heading, we will actually do it right here inside of the testimonials container. So here before these testimonials, we will have our usual subheading and secondary heading. So let's go back and we can again copy that from the previous section. So just this here, right here. And so, as I just said before, we want these headings to be basically before these testimonials here, right? So just like this, but then we don't want them to be centered, and we don't want them to be inside of a container. So actually we don't need any of this here, right? But now we actually do have another problem. And let me illustrate that to you. And so here you can see it. So now remember how we made this entire section a grid container, right? And so now the subheading and the secondary heading here, they simply became grid items as well, right? But that's not what we want. We want them to be basically inside of this left side here of this section. So what we're going to do is to wrap all of this here into another new container element. And with container, I don't mean the container class that we created, but instead, I mean like a parent element. So let's call this the testimonials container. And then let's put the closing tag here after all of this. So right here in the end, but of course, before the gallery. Okay. So here we need to, of course, also change the text. So, well, here we actually didn't get any title. So the subheading is quite simple. It's simply going to be testimonials. But then here we need to come up with another heading. And so the one that I decided to use here is kind of a catchy one, saying once you try it, you can't go back, which is basically the overall message that these 4 testimonials here give to the user. Okay, so let's check it out. And now it is fixed. So just to see here in the inspector, now this one here is a grid container, right? And it contains both the testimonials container and the gallery on the other side, right? And then inside of the testimonials, we have then again another grid, which is for these 4 individual testimonial figures here. Okay, great. So that's great progress already. And so now in the next lecture, we will start building the gallery here on the right side.